This is terrifying. Scientists have discovered a dangerous new bat coronavirus in China that could spark the next pandemic. A newly discovered virus in China, closely related to the deadly MERS coronavirus, is raising global alarm as researchers warn it may only be one small mutation away from infecting humans and potentially sparking another pandemic. Concerns are amplified by the fact that this virus was discovered by the same lab linked to the origins of COVID 19. Now, let's get into the story in detail on this AI podcast.
So you sent us some material that caught our eye immediately, this new virus discovery. And wow, we definitely dove in.
We absolutely did, yeah.
Yeah.
The sources you shared, mostly bits from a scientific study and some, related news reports, they paint a really compelling picture, maybe a bit unsettling too.
Totally. So our mission, really, for this deep dive is to unpack what this new coronavirus, HKU5-CoV2, actually is.
And critically, based on these reports, why scientists are voicing some, pretty serious concerns, even suggesting it might be the source of the, quote, next pandemic.
Right. That's a heavy headline from the reporting, isn't it? And we want to look at what the research actually says about how close this thing might be to jumping into humans. Okay, let's get into it then.
Okay, so at the heart of the material you sent is this virus, HKU5-CoV2, recently identified in China.
And yeah, the immediate red flag, the thing that jumps out from the reporting is this warning. It could potentially spark the next pandemic. And when you hear that, you immediately want to know, well, why?
Exactly. And the reason given in the sources is pretty stark, actually. It's reportedly just one small mutation away from being able to infect human cells.
One small mutation away. Wow. That phrase, it really sticks with you. And the material connects HKU5 to a virus we unfortunately know is dangerous, MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome.
Yes, it points out it's closely related to MERS, and the context provided for MERS is sobering. It's described as a highly lethal pathogen. We're talking a fatality rate around 1/3, about 34%.
That's incredibly high.
Yeah. MERS-CoV first showed up in Saudi Arabia back in 2012, and it's known to spread from camels to humans.
So HKU5 is closely related to something that deadly. And this new virus, HKU5, you said it was originally found in bats, based on the sources.
That's right, bats. And there's another layer here, a detail in the reporting about the researchers who initially found it. They're associated with the same Chinese laboratory that some U.S. agencies, like the FBI and CIA, have reportedly suggested might be linked to the origin of COVID-19.
Okay, so the sources bring this up, and they seem careful to frame it as background context, part of this ongoing, larger debate about the risks of this kind of research. They do explicitly state, though, that this background doesn't mean HKU5 has infected humans.
Right.
And that the whole conversation around COVID origins, lab leak versus wet market, that's still debated. It's presented purely as background from the reporting, not as evidence about HKU5 itself.
Absolutely. It's important context provided by the sources, but distinct from the HKU5 findings. So, moving into the actual science described, the material details specific experiments carried out by scientists at Washington State University, WSU.
Okay, and how did they test this potential jump to humans? What was their method?
Well, they were clever. They created these harmless pseudoviruses.
Well-
You can think of them like empty virus shells that can actually cause disease, but they engineered them to carry the HKU5 spike protein.
Ah, the spike protein, that's the critical part, right? The bit the virus uses to grab onto cells.
Exactly. That's the key. So they took these pseudoviruses with the HKU5 spike and tested them on different types of cells. They used cells engineered to have bat ACE2 receptors. That's the virus's normal target in bats.
Makes sense.
And they also tested them on human ACE2 receptors. Those are the ones found in our own bodies, like in the throat, the mouth, the nose, the respiratory tract.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting based on their findings. The experiments showed HKU5 easily infects the bat cells. No surprise there, that's its natural host.
Correct. But crucially, to infect the human cells, it needed specific mutations, changes basically in that spike protein.
Yeah, okay, so that loops back to the one small mutation away idea.
Yeah.
These mutations, according to the study, they actually make the virus better at latching onto our human ACE2 receptors.
Precisely. And that improvement is what could potentially enable it to infect humans, to make that jump.
And there was a quote from one of the researchers.
Yes, Professor Michael Letko. He's a virologist at WSU, co-lead author on the study. He's quoted saying pretty directly that these HKU5 viruses are just a small step away from the ability to infect humans.
just a small step away. Okay. So based on the material, where is this virus right now? Is it spreading?
Currently, the documentation says it's only spreading in bats across southern and eastern China. But, and this is a big but, in the sources, they point out a major potential risk pathway,
Which is?
the jump to intermediate animals. They mentioned examples like mink or maybe civets.
Okay, intermediate animal. And how would that happen? The sources mention a mechanism?
Yes, they specifically highlight unregulated wildlife trade as a potential bridge for that jump.
Ah, okay. And why is that intermediate animal step such a worry?
Well, because that's potentially the mixing vessel, you see. That's where the virus, once it jumps from bats to, say, a mink, might acquire those critical mutations it needs before it then spills over into people. The intermediate host could be the place it adapts to mammals more broadly, including us.
Got it. That makes sense. And the study itself, you mentioned it was published.
Yes, in Nature Communications. It's a well-regarded journal. And the study focuses on a specific group of coronaviruses called myrbecoviruses.
Herbicoviruses. Okay.
Right. That group includes MERS-CoV, the one we talked about earlier, and also these multiple variants of HKU5.
The sources also mentioned something about looking at the virus structure very closely.
They did. They used a technique called cryo-electron microscopy, cryo-EM. It's basically like an incredibly powerful microscope that lets scientists see the 3D structure of tiny things like proteins in super high detail. They used it to look at the HKU5 spike protein.
And what did that show them?
It showed that while key parts of that spike protein often stay sort of folded up in a closed state, which makes it harder for it to bind to human cells, the structure suggests it could potentially evolve. It could change shape, open up, basically, which would make it much easier for it to enter human cells.
Interesting. So the potential is kind of built into its structure. Now, the material also brought up an earlier finding, something from Wuhan scientists. That sounded pretty alarming on its own.
Ah, yes. You're referring to the report about one specific HKU5 strain called Lineage 2.
Right. That report suggested Lineage 2 could already bind to human ACE2 receptors without needing any more mutations.
That was indeed a significant finding earlier. But the new WSU study, the American one, kind of broadened the picture. Instead of just looking at that single Lineage 2 strain, they analyzed dozens of different myrbecoviruses.
Okay, so a much wider look.
Exactly. And their analysis showed that it wasn't just that one strain. They found that several different HKU5 variants are actually quite close, genetically, structurally, to being able to infect humans. So it paints a picture of perhaps a wider potential risk across this group of related viruses.
And this seems really important to stress based on the sources.
Extremely important. There's currently no evidence that HKU5-CoV2 has actually infected any humans. All this research is about potential.
Right. No infections detected. But the main takeaway concern for the scientists involved, as it comes across in the material you shared, is pretty clear. It's that combination, isn't it?
It is. It's the close family tie to the very deadly MERS virus, plus these experimental findings showing it's potentially just a few small changes away from being able to infect us. That combination makes it something they feel needs serious attention.
Yeah. And the conclusion from the sources, the call to action, seems to be about vigilance.
Absolutely. Vigilant monitoring of these viruses in animal populations, especially bats and potential intermediate hosts, and just continued research. Understanding them better is seen as essential to try and prevent future outbreaks.
Okay, so just to quickly recap this deep dive into the material you sent over. We've looked at this newly identified virus, HKU5-CoV2. We've seen its concerning connection to MERS. We've gone through the research, the pseudovirus experiments showing how close it might be to infecting human cells via ACE2 receptors.
Needing just those small mutations.
Right. And we've touched on the potential pathways for spillover, particularly through intermediate animals potentially linked to wildlife trade.
It's definitely a lot of complex scientific information, but hopefully breaking it down like this helps you understand why scientists are paying attention to this one. It's not just abstract research.
Absolutely. And for you, the listener, having this kind of detail, knowing not just that there's a new virus, but why it's a concern, how they're figuring out the risk, the specific ways it might jump, hopefully gives you a much clearer picture than just a headline.
Indeed. And maybe it leaves us all with a thought to ponder, drawn right from the themes in the material. What does it really mean for us, living day to day, that potentially dangerous viruses might be just one small mutation away from causing a global crisis? And how can understanding these specific pathways, like the role of animal trade or how viruses adapt genetically, help us think more effectively about actually preventing the next one?
Why is the wildlife trade considered a risk factor in virus spillover events? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.